Okay, let's dive in. We're setting out today to really unpack the 4-year term of Joe Biden, the 46th president. We're talking 2021 through 2025.
Right. And it was a presidency, I think, defined almost from the start by, well, by overlapping crises, right? High stakes decisions constantly.
Absolutely. So our mission here is a pretty comprehensive review. We want to look at basically every major policy decision, economics, foreign policy, you name it, and try to figure out what the ultimate outcome was.
And understand that historical footprint, all framed against, the tail end of COVID, economic instability, and just this intense political polarization.
And the starting point itself was unique. Inaugurated January 20th, 2021, became the oldest president right off the bat.
Yep, oldest at the time.
But maybe more critically, politically speaking, he walked into office with the absolute thinnest Democratic majorities you could imagine. The House, yes, but the Senate was 50-50.
Completely reliant on Vice President Harris for any tie-breaking vote. That knife-edge reality shaped everything, legislatively.
And we can't just skip over the transition period either. That was unusual.
Extremely challenged. Even though the election results were clear, the head of the GSA, the General Services Administration—
That's the agency handling government resources, buildings.
Exactly. They initially refused to formally start the transition process.
Which meant what? Practically, no funds, no briefings.
Pretty much. The incoming Biden team was denied access to federal money, office space, crucial communication channels needed for a smooth handover. That didn't happen until November 23rd, 2020.
So they were preparing to govern kind of in the dark, or at least partially blindfolded.
Yeah, very constrained circumstances, yeah. It really set a contentious tone right from the beginning.
Okay, so here's the big puzzle we need to explore. You look at the assessments from political scientists, historians, many rate the presidency pretty favorably.
They do. They point to things like historic job creation, a really strong economic recovery post-COVID, some major legislative wins.
But then you look at the public opinion polls. Consistently low approval ratings throughout much of his term.
Chronically low, yeah.
And his political legacy is now, well, it's tied forever to the fact that his predecessor, Donald Trump, came back and won in 2024.
Making Trump only the second president ever to be succeeded by the person he succeeded. Grover Cleveland being the other one, way back when.
So how do you square that? Economic success on paper, but political rejection in a sense. That's the core tension we're diving into.
Exactly. Lots to unpack there.
Let's start at the beginning then. The first 100 days, that initial burst of activity.
Yeah, that phase was all about signaling a really immediate, really dramatic change, mostly using executive actions.
A deliberate pivot away from the previous administration.
Absolutely. Reversing key policies, especially on climate and immigration, was priority number one.
Those day one reversals were fast and symbolic, rejoining the Paris Agreement on climate change that happened within hours, right?
Hours. Instantly re-engaging internationally on climate. That was a huge campaign promise kept right away.
And domestically, the Keystone XL pipeline permit revocation followed quickly.
It did. And that wasn't just symbolic. That had immediate pushback. 21 Republican state attorneys general filed a major lawsuit.
Arguing what? Overreach?
Economic damage.
Both. That the president overstepped his authority with the executive order and that it was harmful economically. So immediate legal battle there.
Then on immigration, the border wall funding stopped.
Funding halted, yeah. And the national emergency declarations tied to it were ended. It was a very clear signal trying to reset that whole approach. But overshadowing all of that really was the pandemic. That was the immediate, all-consuming crisis.
Day 2, I think it was, he called the COVID response a wartime undertaking.
He did. And he specifically cited the death toll, over 400,000 Americans at that point, surpassing U.S. losses in World War II. That language was meant to mobilize the entire government.
So how did that wartime idea translate into actual policy? What did they do right away?
Primarily, they leaned heavily on the Defense Production Act, the DPA.
That's the law letting the president basically order companies to prioritize government contracts. Exactly. For national defense, or in this case, public health. They used it again and again to speed up the supply chain for everything needed for mass vaccination.
Not just the vaccines themselves.
No. Think about the glass vials, the special syringes, the manufacturing components. All of that needed a boost. The DPA helped secure those.
And that logistical focus was crucial for hitting that big public goal they set.
The 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days, yeah. They actually hit that pretty easily and then, raised the target.
And other measures, mask mandates, WHO.
Federal mask mandates went into effect for federal buildings, on federal lands, public transport, And yes, a big reversal stopping the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization. Dr. Fauci was put right back in charge of the U.S. delegation.
Okay, so all these executive actions set the stage. But then came the first big legislative push, the American Rescue Plan Act.
March 2021. That was the big immediate economic intervention, massive piece of legislation.
$1.9 trillion, right?
$1.9 trillion stimulus package, passed using budget reconciliation.
Which means they only needed Democratic votes in the Senate, bypassing the filibuster.
Correct. Which was essential, given that 50-50 split. The whole design was to tackle the immediate financial pain from the pandemic recession.
So what were the key pieces of that $1.9 trillion? Where did the money go?
A lot went to direct aid, expanded unemployment benefits, keeping those going, and importantly, those $1,400 stimulus checks that went out to most Americans.
I remember those.
Yeah. And critically, it also beefed up the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, temporarily. Made health insurance much cheaper for millions of people.
The argument being, without this huge cash injection, the economy might have just cratered.
That was absolutely the argument, preventing a deeper depression, stabilizing households immediately.
But, and this is a big but, the ARP became really controversial later on, didn't it? The whole inflation argument.
Oh, yeah. That's the core political dilemma right there. Critics jumped on it, saying injecting that much federal money overheated the economy and was a primary driver of the high inflation we saw later.
So, was it? What does the analysis suggest?
Well, it's complex. The data suggests the ARP was very effective in preventing that immediate collapse and helping families.
Yeah.
But the sheer size of it, combined with already snarled global supply chains from the pandemic,
It added fuel to the fire.
it absolutely contributed to the inflationary pressures that really took off in late 2021, early 2022. It was a trade-off, really. Immediate economic rescue versus the risk of longer-term price instability.
Okay, let's broaden out from the first 100 days and look at the domestic policy across the whole term. The economy is central here, and like we said, full of contradictions.
It really is. If you just look at the headline stats, it's an undeniable success story, especially coming out of COVID.
Stronger recovery than other major developed nations.
Strongest economic recovery of any G7 nation. Yep. The job market was incredibly hot. Unemployment hit lows not seen in 70 years.
And job creation numbers.
Over 16 million new jobs created during his 4 years. That's the most of any single-term president in U.S. history. By those metrics output, employment, the economy, really roared back.
Okay, sounds fantastic. So why the disconnect? Why wasn't that felt more positively by the public? You mentioned wages and inequality.
This is absolutely crucial. Even with record low unemployment and lots of jobs available, the inflation we just talked about basically wiped out wage gains for many, if not most, workers.
So wages went up, but prices went up more.
Essentially, yes. Overall, real median full-time wages, that's wages adjusted for inflation, they stagnated. People were working, but their actual purchasing power wasn't really improving.
And inequality piece.
That structural problem just kept getting worse, unfortunately. The share of the nation's total wealth held by the very wealthiest, the top 0.1%, actually went up during his term, from about 13.2% to 13.8%.
So the recovery wasn't evenly distributed. The top benefited disproportionately.
That's what the data indicates.
All right, let's tackle the inflation debate head on then. The administration took a lot of heat for high inflation and high gas prices.
Immense political pressure, constantly. But again, context is really important here.
What's the context?
Well, first, inflation did eventually come back down near pre-pandemic levels. Second, and this is key, the inflation rates in the U.S. were very similar to, or even lower than, rates in other comparable developed countries. It wasn't just a U.S. problem.
So the argument was this is a global phenomenon driven by the Ukraine war, pandemic supply chains.
That was the administration's core argument, yes. Global shocks were the main driver.
But were there specific domestic factors that economists pointed to besides maybe the stimulus spending?
Yeah, a couple of big structural issues were frequently cited. One was persistent housing shortages across the country. That's been building for years, slow construction, zoning laws.
Driving up rents and home prices.
Exactly. And the other factor was the increasing impact of climate shocks. More frequent and severe droughts, floods, storms, those hit commodity prices, food prices, insurance costs really hard.
Things monetary policy can't easily fix.
Right. These were deeper systemic pressures.
Okay, despite those economic headwinds and pressures, they did manage to get some major legislation through Congress. After the ARP, The next big one was infrastructure, right?
The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, yeah. Signed in late 2021. This was really the signature bipartisan achievement of the term.
Bipartisan. That sounds almost quaint now.
It really does. But they got it done. It's a huge 10-year plan pouring money into physical infrastructure. Roads, bridges, public transit, ports.
And broadband internet, too, I recall.
Yes, a big focus on expanding high-speed internet access, especially in rural areas and underserved urban communities. It felt like a throwback to those big mid-century federal projects.
But that infrastructure win, as significant as it was, kind of came out of the ashes of a much bigger, more ambitious plan that failed, right? Build Back Better.
Exactly. Build Back Better, or BBB, was the administration's original grand vision, a massive expansion of the social safety net.
What kinds of things were in that original plan?
Universal pre-kindergarten, extending the enhanced child tax credit that had been in the ARP, huge investments in climate action, affordable housing, elder care. It was sweeping.
And it failed because...
It failed in the Senate. Democrats couldn't get all 50 of their senators on board. Specifically, Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema balked at the overall cost and the scope.
Worried it would fuel inflation even more.
That was their main public argument, yeah. Concerns about inflation and the national debt. So BBB died.
Which led to Plan B, or maybe Plan C, the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022.
Right. The IRA was basically what could be salvaged from the BBB wreckage that could still pass via reconciliation with just Democratic votes.
So what made it into the IRA? How did it differ from BBB?
It dramatically scaled back the social spending parts. No universal pre-K, no extended child tax credit. But it kept significant chunks of the climate and healthcare provisions.
Funded how?
Primarily through new taxes on large corporations, including that 15% minimum tax we can talk about, and savings from the healthcare side.
Okay, let's break down the IRA's impact. Climate investment, how big was it?
It allocated about $370 billion specifically for climate and clean energy initiatives. That's the single largest investment in climate action in U.S. history.
And how does it work? What does it actually do for people or businesses?
A lot of it is focused on incentives, tax credits, basically.
Yeah.
Making it cheaper for homeowners to install solar panels or buy energy-efficient appliances. Tax credits for buying electric vehicles, both new and used.
So using the market to drive the transition.
That's the idea. Using tax policy to push down the cost of clean energy and accelerate its adoption.
And the healthcare parts of the IRA.
Two really big things there. First, it extended those enhanced ACA subsidies for another 3 years, which kept health insurance premiums lower for millions on the exchanges.
Stabilizing that market.
Yes. And second, the really groundbreaking piece. It finally gave Medicare the power to negotiate the prices of certain high-cost prescription drugs.
That's huge. Medicare couldn't negotiate prices before.
Unbelievably, no. By law, Medicare was prohibited from negotiating drug prices, unlike, say, the VA or private insurance companies. The IRA changed that, starting with a small list of expensive drugs.
Allowing the government, as this massive buyer, to finally push back on prices.
Exactly. And the IRA also capped the out-of-pocket cost of insulin at $35 per month for Medicare beneficiaries. That was a very popular, tangible benefit.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's talk labor policy. This administration seemed very deliberately, very publicly pro-union.
Oh, absolutely. Arguably the most pro-union administration since maybe FDR or Truman. They took concrete steps.
Like what? Beyond just rhetoric.
Well, for federal workers, they took action early on to overturn something called Schedule F.
Remind me what Schedule F was.
It was a Trump-era executive order that would have let potentially tens of thousands of career civil servants be reclassified as basically at-will employees.
Meaning they could be fired more easily, lose protections.
Exactly. It would have stripped away their civil service protections, undermined collective bargaining rights. Biden reversed that. They also pushed successfully for a $15 minimum wage for all federal contract workers.
But the most visible moment, the real symbol of this pro-union stance, had to be the picket line visit, right?
Without a doubt. President Biden physically joining the UAW picket line in Michigan during their 2023 strike against the big three automakers. That was unprecedented for a sitting U.S. president.
And he used their slogan.
He did. Repeated the union motto, record profits mean record contracts. It was an incredibly powerful image, aligning the presidency directly with striking workers.
But there was a big contradiction here, wasn't there? The rail strike situation in 2023.
Yes, that was a major political tightrope walk, and it definitely alienated some supporters on the left.
What happened there?
Basically, the nation was facing a potential national rail strike, which economists warned would be catastrophic crippling supply chains, stopping food shipments, spiking prices just as inflation was peaking.
A nightmare scenario economically.
It's a total nightmare. So Biden made the tough call to sign legislation passed by Congress that forced the rail companies and the unions to accept a contract agreement, effectively blocking the strike from happening.
But the unions hadn't all agreed to that contract, especially on sick leave.
That was the sticking point. Paid sick leave was a key demand, and the agreement didn't mandate it universally. So many rail workers and progressives felt betrayed. The pro-union president used his power to prevent them from striking for better conditions.
How did the administration try to smooth that over? Did they just move on?
No, they pivoted pretty quickly. After signing the bill, they put intense pressure behind the scenes on the rail companies to voluntarily grant paid sick leave anyway.
Did that work?
Largely, yes. Through continued negotiation and that executive pressure, by mid-2023, a majority of rail workers had secured agreements that included paid sick days. It showed that duality act to prevent economic disaster, but then use other levers to still push for the union's goals.
Interesting. Okay, let's touch on regulation. Antitrust seemed like a real focus area.
It did. This administration took a noticeably more aggressive stance on corporate concentration. The appointment of Lina Khan to chair the FTC was a huge signal.
She's known for being a strong critic of big tech monopolies.
Exactly. And we saw that translate into action. There was a significant court victory against Google over its search dominance, and the Justice Department filed a major lawsuit aiming to break up Live Nation and Ticketmaster.
The argument being they have a stranglehold on live events.
That's the core of the suit, yeah.
Nah.
Abusing market dominance in the live music and ticketing industry.
And there was also that push against jump fees.
Yeah, that was a coordinated effort, really ramping up in 2024. Yeah. Multiple agencies involved: the FTC, the FCC for communications, the CFPB for financial products.
Trying to eliminate what? Hidden charges?
Exactly. Those surprise resort fees on hotel bills, excessive credit card late fees, unexpected bank overdraft charges, things that disproportionately hit lower-income folks. It was framed as a core consumer protection initiative.
One last economic piece, that global minimum tax deal. That felt like a big, maybe under-the-radar diplomatic achievement.
It was huge, and yes, maybe didn't get as much headline attention as some other things. Yeah. But in 2021, the administration really championed and secured agreement from over 130 countries.
Including all the major economies.
Pretty much all of them. An agreement that multinational corporations should pay at least a 15% minimum income tax rate wherever they operate.
The goal being to stop companies from shifting profits to ultra-low tax havens, ending that race to the bottom.
Precisely. It was a landmark step towards ensuring large corporations pay a fairer share globally. Took a lot of diplomatic muscle to get that done.
All right, let's pivot to social policy, the justice system, and the courts. Maybe the most lasting domestic legacy here will be the judicial appointments.
Quite possibly. Especially given how narrow that Senate majority was. They made it a huge priority.
How many judges did they actually get confirmed?
Over the 4 years, 235 Article III federal judges confirmed by the Senate. That includes district courts, appeals courts, and the Supreme Court.
Is that a lot compared to previous presidents?
It's the most judges confirmed in the first 2 years of a presidency since JFK. They moved very quickly to fill vacancies, many left over from the previous administration, and also focused on diversifying the bench.
And the biggest appointment, of course, was to the Supreme Court.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, fulfilling that campaign promise to appoint the first Black woman to the Supreme Court. A truly historic moment, changing the makeup of the court.
On broader social and racial equity issues, some actions started right on day one.
They did. Reversing the ban on transgender people serving openly in the military was immediate.
And within the justice system itself.
A key directive was telling the Justice Department to phase out the use of private prisons for federal inmates. The argument was to remove the profit motive from incarceration.
Symbolically, there were some important steps, too.
Yes. Making Juneteenth a federal holiday in 2021. Signing the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act in 2022, finally making lynching a federal hate crime after decades, centuries really, of failed attempts.
And the Harriet Tubman $20 bill.
They restarted that effort, which had stalled, working to get her image onto the currency. Small steps, maybe, but culturally significant.
Of course, the biggest shift in the social landscape during his term was the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision.
June 2022, a seismic event, ending the constitutional right to abortion after nearly 50 years.
How did the administration respond? They tried legislation first.
They did. They pushed for a federal law to codify abortion rights, but it failed to overcome the Senate filibuster. Not enough votes.
So they shifted to executive actions.
Yes. A key move was ending long-standing restrictions, enforced through the FDA, on mailing abortion pills. That significantly expanded access, especially for people in states where clinics were closing.
But there was pushback from abortion rights advocates too, right? They wanted the administration to do more, like using federal lands.
There were strong calls, yes, to allow abortion services on federal property, military bases, national parks located within states that had banned abortion.
And the administration decided against that. Why?
They cited legal concerns, basically, worries about the risk of prosecution. They feared state attorneys general could still target doctors providing services or patients receiving them, even on federal land, leading to protracted and risky legal battles. They opted for what they saw as a legally safer path.
Let's talk crime rates and criminal justice. There is a pervasive narrative, especially in conservative media, about a crime wave. What did the data actually show?
This is a really stark example of perception versus reality. The FBI's own data showed that the national violent crime rate actually went down significantly during the first couple of years of the Biden term.
Down. To what level?
By 2022, it was near a 50-year low, and preliminary data showed it continued to drop in 2023. This was completely contrary to the dominant political narrative.
So what policies were they pursuing on crime? Was it all defund the police, as some critics claimed?
Not at all. In fact, the Justice Department rescinded a Trump-era policy that had limited the use of consent decrees. Those are the tools used to force reforms in police departments with patterns of misconduct. So more federal oversight, potentially.
And funding for police?
The administration proposed doubling the funding for the COPS hiring program, which gives grants to state and local governments specifically to hire more police officers. So the policy was more complex than the rhetoric suggested.
Okay, one of the most unique and perhaps controversial domestic actions came right at the very end of the term. The use of clemency power. Pardons and commutations.
Unprecedented in scale, really. Biden issued more individual pardons and sentence commutations than any other president in history.
What were some of the big categories?
There were broad actions, like pardoning all prior federal offenses for simple marijuana possession, affecting thousands of people. A big step toward addressing past drug law disparities.
And death row.
Yes. A major move just weeks before leaving office. He commuted the sentences of almost all federal death row inmates, 37 out of 40, to life in prison without parole. A very strong statement against capital punishment.
But the final wave of pardons in the last hours stirred up a lot of controversy. They included family members, political figures.
They did. Sweeping preemptive pardons were granted to his son, Hunter Biden, and also to his siblings, and then to high-profile figures associated with his administration or political allies, people like General Mark Milley, Dr. Anthony Fauci, members of the January 6th committee.
Preemptive pardons, meaning they weren't charged with anything.
Correct. Pardons granted before any charges were filed, or even investigations concluded in some cases.
What was the justification given for such broad, controversial pardons, especially a family?
The White House explicitly stated it was due to concern about potential baseless and politically motivated investigations they expected the incoming Trump administration might launch.
So protecting them from future prosecution.
That was the stated rationale. To prevent misuse of the justice system for political retribution and to promote stability. But of course, it immediately drew intense criticism about fairness and the appearance of protecting political allies and family.
It really highlights the extreme polarization and lack of trust that defined the end of his term, doesn't it? Feeling the need to use that ultimate power in such a protective, controversial way.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about the political environment he felt he was operating in right up to the final moments.
Okay, let's shift to the global stage, foreign policy. The stated goal from day one was restoring U.S. leadership, rebuilding alliances.
America is back, was the slogan, re-engaging with international institutions and partners.
But that mission got tested almost immediately and very harshly by the Afghanistan withdrawal in August 2021.
Yeah, that was a tumultuous moment. The decision itself to complete the withdrawal wasn't really a surprise. Biden had argued for ending that war for years, even as vice president.
He framed it as ending nation building.
Exactly. Ending the forever war, focusing U.S. resources elsewhere. That part was consistent with his long-held views.
But the execution of the withdrawal, that drew widespread criticism.
Intense criticism from Democrats and Republicans alike. The speed of the Afghan government's collapse caught everyone off guard, it seems.
Intelligence failure, planning failure.
Likely a combination. The chaotic scenes at the Kabul airport, the rapid Taliban takeover, it led to serious questions about the planning, the intelligence assessments, and the overall competence of the operation. A very difficult start on the foreign policy front.
That withdrawal did seem to mark a clearer pivot, though, away from counterterrorism in the Middle East toward strategic competition with major powers.
Definitely, especially China and Russia. The focus shifted very clearly.
So what did the China strategy look like in practice?
Primarily, strengthening alliances in the Indo-Pacific region to counter China's influence. Two big moves there. First, signing AUKs.
That's the security pact with Australia and the UK.
Right. Focused on sharing advanced defense technologies, most notably helping Australia acquire nuclear-powered submarines. A major strategic move.
And the Quad.
Hosting regular meetings of the Quad leaders, that's the US, Japan, India, and Australia. Elevating that group as a key democratic counterweight to China in the region.
Was there an economic component, too?
Yes. They launched something called the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, trying to build deeper economic ties, set trade standards, and offer an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Basically, containment through coalition building.
Then the focus on Russia became all-consuming after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022.
Absolutely. The response was swift and massive, coordinating with allies, immediate severe sanctions.
Including targeting Putin personally and Russia's central bank.
Yes, unprecedented sanctions hitting Putin, his inner circle, and crucially, freezing hundreds of billions of dollars of Russia's foreign currency reserves held abroad. A major economic blow.
And the support for Ukraine.
Huge commitment. Over $100 billion in combined military, financial, and humanitarian aid flowed from the U.S. over the course of the war. Plus, rallying NATO allies to provide support and strengthening NATO itself.
Bringing in new members.
Supporting and facilitating Finland and Sweden joining NATO, a direct consequence of Russia's aggression, significantly strengthening the alliance's northern flank.
Biden's rhetoric on Putin was also unusually strong, wasn't it?
Very direct, famously saying early on that Putin cannot remain in power, and later describing Russia's actions in Ukraine as genocide. Very forceful language, signaling unwavering U.S. commitment.
Interestingly, though, right at the start of the administration, there was actually a moment of cooperation with Russia.
There was. One of Biden's very first calls was with Putin in January 2021, and they agreed to extend the New START treaty for 5 years.
That's the Nuclear Arms Control Treaty.
The last remaining major nuclear arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia. Extending it provided a crucial, albeit temporary, bit of stability in that relationship before everything deteriorated.
Okay, let's turn to the Middle East. Always complex. Early in the term, there was a shift on Yemen policy.
Yes. Biden announced an end to U.S. support for the offensive operations led by Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. He called it a humanitarian and strategic catastrophe.
Signaling a tougher stance on Saudi Arabia, focusing on human rights.
That was the initial message, putting some distance there after the previous administration's very close ties. However,
it didn't last.
Well, reality intruded. Later in the term, with global oil prices soaring after the Ukraine invasion and needing regional stability, Biden did re-engage with Saudi leadership, including that controversial visit.
So balancing energy needs and geopolitics against human rights concerns.
A classic foreign policy dilemma. The administration maintained human rights were still on the agenda, but the priorities clearly shifted due to global events.
The defining Middle East challenge, though, especially in the latter part of the term, became the Israel-Gaza war after the Hamas attacks in October 2023.
Absolutely. This put the administration in an incredibly difficult position, trying to walk a very fine line.
A dual-track approach, you called it.
Yeah. On one track, strong condemnation of Hamas, reaffirming Israel's right to defend itself and providing significant military aid and support to Israel.
And the other track?
Simultaneously pushing for humanitarian aid into Gaza, trying to alleviate the devastating civilian crisis there, committing over $100 million in U.S. aid, brokering temporary pauses in fighting, pushing for hostage releases.
This tension played out very publicly at the UN, with the U.S. using its veto.
Repeatedly. The U.S. vetoed several Security Council resolutions calling for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire.
Why? What was the rationale?
The stated reason was often to protect ongoing diplomatic negotiations, ensure hostage releases were part of any deal, and uphold Israel's right to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities.
But it drew massive international criticism.
Huge criticism, globally. and intense backlash domestically, especially from progressive Democrats and Arab American communities who felt the U.S. wasn't doing nearly enough to stop the bloodshed and the humanitarian suffering in Gaza, a major source of internal division.
Lastly, on global security, any key counterterrorism successes? And that big prisoner swap.
Yes, on counterterrorism, the administration authorized successful operations that killed two top terrorist leaders. The head of ISIS, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi, and the leader of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, showed continued capability there.
And the prisoner exchange.
The Ankara prisoner exchange in 2024. It was genuinely historic, the largest U.S.-Russia prisoner swap since the Cold War ended. It secured the release of several high-profile Americans detained in Russia, including journalist Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan.
A rare moment of successful diplomacy with Russia during that period.
Very rare. And Biden used it to highlight the importance of alliances and persistent diplomacy, even with adversaries.
Okay, let's bring it back home for the final stretch. The political environment, the investigations, Biden's image. It felt like the administration was under constant siege.
It really did. The level of scrutiny was intense. First, there was the special counsel investigation led by Robert Hur.
About the classified documents found at his former office and home.
Exactly. Documents from his time as vice president found at the Penn Biden Center and his Delaware residence.
What was the conclusion of that investigation?
The final report stated that no criminal charges are warranted. They found evidence of mishandling, but not willful intent to retain or disclose classified information, which is the legal standard for prosecution.
But the report itself caused a huge political firestorm, didn't it? Because of the comments about his memory.
Yes. While clearing him legally, the report included controversial descriptions questioning the president's memory and mental acuity, citing specific examples from interviews. That part of the report immediately dominated headlines and fueled the ongoing debate about his age and fitness for office.
And while that was happening, Congress was pursuing its own investigations, the impeachment inquiry.
Launched by then-Speaker Kevin McCarthy in late 2023 under pressure from hardline House Republicans. It focused mainly on unsubstantiated allegations linking President Biden to his son Hunter's foreign business dealings.
Did that inquiry go anywhere?
Not really. After months of hearings and investigation, it failed to uncover any concrete evidence of wrongdoing or impeachable offenses by President Biden himself. It's sort of just fizzled out by the spring of 2024 without ever holding an actual impeachment vote.
So all this political turmoil, the investigations, how did it track with his approval ratings?
The ratings tell a story of deep, persistent division. He started okay, above 55% approval, right after inauguration.
But that didn't last.
No. It dropped significantly after the Afghanistan withdrawal, then stayed stubbornly low, often in the low 40s or even high 30s, weighed down by inflation concerns and polarization. His first-year average approval rating was about 49%, which is the second lowest since modern polling began, only slightly better than Trump's first year.
Wow. And the polarization within those numbers was extreme.
Absolutely unprecedented. The gap between Democratic approval and Republican approval was consistently massive, often 80 points or more.
Give me an example.
In 2022, one poll had 91% of Democrats approving of his job performance, compared to just 8% of Republicans. It wasn't just disagreement, it was two completely different realities.
And that constant backdrop of polarization, combined with the age questions fueled by things like the Hur report,
Right.
it all culminated in his decision about 2024.
Exactly. The relentless focus on his age and mental fitness, the tough political climate, the low approval ratings, all these factors surely contributed to his eventual decision to withdraw from the 2024 presidential race, a stunning move that reshaped the entire election.
And brought his term to a close with that farewell address from the Oval Office in January 2025, just before his successor took office.
A rather abrupt political end, given the circumstances.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground. Economic recovery, legislative wins like the IRA and infrastructure, major foreign policy shifts in Afghanistan, Ukraine, the Middle East, the judicial appointments, the controversies, the polarization. How do we synthesize all this? What does it all mean?
Well, if you step back, you see a presidency that, on paper, achieved quite a bit under incredibly difficult circumstances. Significant economic recovery, historic climate investments, a major judicial reshaping, navigating huge global crises.
All while facing constant political attacks and working with razor-thin margins in Congress.
Precisely. But you also see the contradictions. The economic gains not fully felt due to inflation and inequality, the foreign policy goal of restoring stability clashing with chaotic events like Afghanistan and the deep divisions revealed by Gaza, the legislative wins overshadowed by persistent low approval.
So for you, the listener, hopefully this deep dive gives you the detailed context to grapple with those contradictions yourself, to understand the why behind the decisions and the what happened next for each major policy area.
And it leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought to chew on. Considering the extreme polarization we saw, and the fact that his successor ended up being his predecessor, did the Biden administration ultimately succeed in that core goal of restoring U.S. leadership and stability on the world stage? Or did its domestic policies, even the successful ones, end up reflecting and maybe even reinforcing the deep, seemingly intractable divisions the country was already facing when he took office in 2021?
A question history will continue to debate for a long time.
No easy answer there.